Colossians for 7 weeks now. The Apostle Paul had been giving them a lot of good instruction about living the Christian life. He's been encouraging them to stand firm in their faith and to watch out for false teachers. He has reminded them that the good news, which is salvation through Jesus, is available to all who will believe, regardless of nationality or upbringing. Paul also tells them that because they have accepted the gift of salvation, which is a repair of man's broken relationship with Father God, then they ought to be in the process of putting away their old sinful ways of living, their old ungodly habits, and learning new godly habits. Now, he is going to enter into the topic of what a Christian household should look like. And it contains verses that some people consider controversial and some people downright hate. But the hatred is really more for the way that the verses have been abused than for the verses themselves. So let's dive in and see what sense we can make of it all. And again, for those of you watching online, I primarily am using the New Living Translation for this study, unless otherwise noted. So Colossians chapter 3, verse 18. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting for those who belong to the Lord. Once God had created woman, he rested forever from creating. He never made anything else. He had saved the best for last. And when he was finished, that was it. We find absolutely no evidence in Scripture of any more creating going on from God after he created woman. From this point forward, he leaves the creating to man, even though man is a feeble creator compared to God. But he gave us imagination and ingenuity and a thirst for invention, and he left the rest up to us. But we will never equal anything that God created. Woman was the best and the last. And I don't believe that this verse is about a lesser being submitting to domination by a greater being. What it does speak to is that in any relationship between two people, there will come disagreements. Wives have every right to voice their opinion in all matters and even try to persuade her husband towards her point of view. But when there is an impasse, when no agreement can be made, there needs to be a final authority, a tiebreaker, so to speak. God is saying that the final word belongs to the man. Husbands, this is not permission to control your wives with an iron fist. Such control would contradict the next verse, Colossians 3:19. Husbands, love your wives and never treat them harshly. It's difficult to force an agreement out of someone without treating them harshly, and that's contrary to love. These two verses allow the husband freedom to choose to accept the wife's point of view and choice as long as it does not violate the will of God. And we're going to look again at God's definition of love from Corinthians. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. And this is from the New King James. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. And thinks no evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. A husband who insists that his way is always the right way and the only way would struggle to fit the above definition of love. Scriptures clearly give husbands the final say, but if you want a better chance of making the right decision as often as possible, and you would do well to listen to your wife. I hope it would be pretty obvious to you by now that Diane and I are different. Aside from some of the obvious differences, we grew up different. She grew up on a small farm in North Dakota. I grew up in the city in Phoenix. We had different parents, different teachers, different life experiences. And she looks at life differently than I do, and that's a good thing. That helps make us more complete as a couple. And sometimes she sees things in situations that I don't see, and sometimes I see things in situations that she doesn't see. And it's only by talking to each other that we find out where those differences are. And I would be a fool to not respect her opinion sometimes. Sometimes I'm right. Sometimes, I hope.
Sometimes you're not.
Sometimes I'm not. And I have to be willing to accept that. And humble myself in those situations and say, okay. So.
Well, and to be fair, sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm not. So.
It works both ways. I firmly believe that's part of why God made man and woman and asked them to join together. It's that combination that makes us stronger as a couple than we could be as individuals. Colossians chapter 3, verse 20. Children, always obey your parents, for this pleases the Lord. I'm sorry, kids, there's really not too many ways I can spin this. It pretty much means obey your parents. When you look it up in the Greek, the word here that is translated obey is the Greek word hupokuo. And it pretty much just means listen and obey. Sorry. So when your dad says to do something and you don't want to do it and you ask why, and your dad says, next slide.
Because I said so.
Because I say so. That really is enough of a reason. And don't get caught in the trap that says, you know, if I don't like Dad's answer, I'll go to Mom. Because Mom also has the authority to say, because I say so. The parents don't abuse this privilege. Next verse. Fathers, do not aggravate your children, or they will become discouraged. Be careful how you look at your parents right now. Now, to me, this seems an impossible commandment. Is there any father here who has never aggravated their children? Okay.
You're not supposed to lie in church.
Not supposed to lie ever.
I've got a special altar call in mind for a couple of you. One of the most important jobs you have as a parent is encouraging your children. It's a hard work. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for them to be discouraged and aggravated once they get out of the home. The world doesn't need any help from you to cause aggravation on your children. Their best chance of dealing well with the world is to grow up with a positive self-attitude and a firm foundation in knowing who they are in Jesus. Now that doesn't mean coddle them, spoil them, and always let them have their way, because they need to learn. And sometimes learning is through your discipline. Sometimes learning comes when you allow them to do things their way, knowing that they will regret it. But they learn in the process. The point here is, where is your heart and what is your habit? Don't be in the habit of aggravating your children just to assert your authority, because that will backfire someday. I hope there's no slaves in the room today, that there's still some useful information in the following verse, because it can just as easily apply to people in the workplace. So, Colossians chapter 3, verse 22. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything you do. Try to please them all the time, not just when they are watching you. Serve them sincerely because of your reverence for the Lord. So if you have a job and you're not the owner or the manager of the place where you work, then you have an obligation to follow the rules and regulations of that workplace. This doesn't mean just the rules that you like and agree with. This doesn't mean just when your boss is looking. And this doesn't mean only if you like and respect your boss. Your boss may be your boss at the job, but your Lord is Jesus. And he has an expectation of you that whatever you do, you will do to the glory of the Lord. And it doesn't glorify the Lord when you are lazy at work, when you misbehave at work, when you steal from work, when you backstab your boss at work. These are not pleasing to the Lord. And when he gave these instructions to us, he knew that there would be bad bosses. It's no secret. He knew ahead of time what he was getting you into. But remember, he is also watching the boss. And there will come a day when everyone will have to answer to Jesus for every action and every word. No one is getting away with anything. Verse 23. Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. So there you go. If you don't like your boss, just imagine that Jesus is your boss, and that other person that hangs around and annoys you is really someone that needs to see the love of God at work. There's a man who was part of the administration, I think board of directors at the Bible college we went to, and he's there sometimes and lectures, teaches, and he tells a story of when he was a young man. He's a businessman, a very successful businessman, but of course he didn't start off owning any companies. He started off working for someone. And when he was early in his career, he had a manager who would take the ideas that he brought to the team and he would push them upward to the big boss as though they were his own. And Paul never argued the point. He never tried to say, hey, that was my idea. I should be the one getting the bonus. He just worked as though to the Lord. And this went on for a couple of years. And then the big bosses called him into a meeting one day. And they said, you know, we've been observing you, and we've been observing your boss, and we're of the opinion that all of these really good ideas your boss is presenting probably have been coming from you, are we right? And he said, yes. And it wasn't too long before he was boss over his boss. The point is, they recognized what was going on, and they honored his integrity in being a good employee, and they promoted him. Yeah, it took a little while. But sometimes we have to put up with things for a little while before they get better. Colossians chapter 3, verse 24. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. Here's another indication that there is a reward system coming into play later. I've discussed this before in another context from other scriptures. People are going to get into heaven who don't always behave well. Don't look at your neighbor. This applies to you too, because you all made mistakes. get into heaven because you're saved. Jesus paid for those mistakes already. Once we enter heaven, there appears from some of these scriptures to be a reward system for those who managed through life to behave a little better than others. And we don't get a lot of clear idea about what that reward system is or what it will look like. And how do I know that the reward Paul is speaking about is not just entrance into heaven? Well, because he's addressed the letter to believers. He's talking to saved